Mobius. What a pleasure to sit with you.
Pleasure to be
Really
here.
good to have you with us. You know, I have to say, most of my life I've been covering African markets and emerging markets, and I remember we used to revere you as the man that was able to look through the noise and find these incredible gems that I guess, you know, banks and other financial institutions just refuse to see as bankable, and you broke through that. So it's really an honor to sit with you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we still have the Assistant DG with us, and you were talking about space finance, and he's staying on for my very first question, because I saw you listening to what he had to say about funding space and space companies and technology, and we heard that, you know, many companies do fail, but there are a few that are exciting. Do you find the space exciting?
No, I think his comments were very well taken because definitely, you know, out of 10 or 20, one will succeed.
Yeah.
So as an investor, you have to really do your homework. So you have a lot of companies that look like they're going to do well, but at the end of the day, they don't. And that's true not only in aerospace, but in every field. So as fund managers, it's a big, big job to seek out those companies that are going to do well in the future. Of course, the past is prologue, they say. So it's very important to look at the past of the people involved in the company, and of course the financials as well. But in any case, it's worth the risk.
Do you have exposure to aerospace companies?
In the past, yes.
Yeah.
I've had experience in the aerospace industry, and of course it's one of the fastest growing. And not only, if you look at the total air travel space, not only the manufacture of planes, not only the space area, but also the servicing of these companies is very, very important. And some of these companies are doing very well.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got to look at the aerospace industry. I mean, there's so much, and I know that you're focusing on technology and AI, and you've been such a huge pioneer in creating emerging market funds, I mean, from the late 80s, and going, I guess, into areas and territories and companies where many feared to go because of perceptions of risk. So where do we stand right now with so many geopolitical issues the world is facing, worries about inflation? You've been through many cycles, so I guess perhaps some of the stuff isn't new to you, but where do we stand right now?
Well, you know, when we started in 1987 with the very first emerging markets fund, at that time, there were only 5 markets in which we could invest. Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Mexico. All the other countries were closed. Yeah. Latin America was closed for one reason or another. At that time, by the way, the Middle East was not considered an emerging market because they, on a per capita basis, were so wealthy. Of course, now that's changing, and that now the scope is widening. But in any case, we had 100 million to invest in those days, and we didn't know where to put it because there was everything was closed. There was no China, no Russia, no Eastern Europe. All that was out of the question. Now, at the peak of our emerging markets funds, we ended up running $60 billion, and we were invested in 70 countries around the world.
So you started with 100 million, and it went up to 60 billion. That's incredible.
60 billion. So it's an amazing adventure when you look at these 30 years, from 1987 to now. And of course now, what is happening is that we're changing the definition of emerging markets. Because originally, they were considered the low and middle income countries. And of course, at that time, it included all of Latin America, all of Africa, all of Asia, with the exception of Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Now, we're in a situation where Korea has got a per capita income higher than Spain. So now, is it an emerging market or not? So this is the kind of question that's come up. And the reason why...
It was a lot more obvious in the late 80s and 90s what an emerging market was. Exactly. And now that definition has become blurry.
Now it's changed.
Huh.
So, and then the other change is that these huge companies in America, whether it be Apple, whether it be Microsoft, whatever, these companies are making more and more money in the so-called emerging market countries. So the reason why the fund that we now have started is called Emerging Opportunities, because we say it's not going to be just emerging market countries as traditionally defined, but it's going to be emerging opportunities. Any company that's making money in these emerging markets, these emerging countries. And that includes companies listed in the US, in the Middle East, and so forth.
I'm sure everyone wants to know what you're excited about now and which companies, but I'm going to make you wait a little longer because I want to tackle some other things first. You've been to 112 countries around the world. And I guess that's one of the things that really differentiated you from so many other investors. You wanted to go see what was going on and experience those markets. And now we are lucky to have you in Dubai and call you a resident here. So why are you here? What do you find so attractive about being here, but also being in the region?
What I find very attractive about Dubai and the UAE generally is the fact that they're so open to foreign investors. This, by the way,
this could be an important call about an investment opportunity.
One of the problems with, so by the way, very interesting statistics. There are now something like 8 billion cell phones in the world.
Wow. And
on the average, people spend 3 hours on their cell phone. In the case of the Philippines, it's 5 hours. So these are the kinds of developments we're seeing around the world. But anyway, what we found attractive about UAE and Dubai in particular was the openness to of the society, number one. And number two, the low or no tax. Very attractive for being here with a very low tax regime. And the third thing is it's so convenient to come in and out. You've got an incredible airline, Emirates. You can fly everywhere in the world. The number of direct flights that you have out of Dubai is probably more than any other country in the world. So this is the kind of connection that we like. We like to have this connectivity. And as you know, we travel a great deal. In order to invest, you've got to travel. You've got to meet these companies. And Dubai is a great place to be.
Perfect segue into where have you been lately? Which countries have you visited? Which companies have you spoken to? And what are you excited about?
This year, I've been to Japan, Taiwan, Okinawa, Hong Kong, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. That's about it.
That's about, well, I mean, that's incredible. That is really incredible. What are some of the most exciting things that you've seen in these markets where you found, and again, I hit this point, you're so good at finding these undervalued gems that have the ability to grow by hundreds of %. I mean, and your knack of doing this really revered globally. So what is the next big thing?
Well, the first thing is the fundamentals.
Yeah.
So we look at return on capital. We look at earnings growth, of course. We look at the debt. Companies with low debt is something we want to look at. But then after that, after this fundamental view, the most important thing is the people. Who is running the company? What kind of people are they? What is their background? What is their education? What experience do they have in operating companies? So I would say it's 50% people more than the financials. And that's where what we call the quantamental system comes into place, because on the one hand, the quants look at all the numbers, and nowadays with AI, we can look at these numbers at a much faster pace than any time before. But then the mental part, the fundamental part, is so important because it's when you begin to look at the people who run the company.
Quantamental, really interesting. I'm glad that you say people are still viable and relevant in the world of AI and technology. That's really important, right? Technology and AI as well, I've been reading that it's one of the sort of interesting spots for you right now. Tell me about some of the companies and the sectors within. Is it software? Is it hardware? Is it across the value chain? And in which countries?
Well, first of all, when we look at AI, we look at a plethora of capabilities. Because AI not only speeds up the calculations, but it also encompasses a wider variety of sources of information. So what we're doing with AI is using this, it's a tool that we use to work faster, make decisions faster, and look at more data around the world. And that includes not only financial data, not only industry data, but people data. In other words, what are the people thinking about? What is the web saying about this company? So this is the kind of thing that we now have at our fingertips, which we didn't have before at the speed at which we're working. So that's number one. Number two is that we're now in a period of mankind's history where technology is hitting every sector. So it's true, we've made a lot of money on the chip sector, the semiconductor sector, the companies that do the software for the semiconductors. And by the way, the Taiwanese are number one in that field. Yeah. But what we're seeing now is a migration to other countries around the world, and most particularly to India. India, I believe, is going to become a huge manufacturer of semiconductors. They already are a very big producer of software. They export software around the world. Soon they will become a big producer of hardware, starting with semiconductors and going through the whole list of hardware.
Does India have the ability sort of to replace China as, you know, the dominant player within this space, would you say?
If you count Taiwan as China, yes. Because, you know, a lot of people consider Taiwan part of China. But it's true the culture of Taiwan is very, very similar to China, but it's a completely different government structure. It's a democratic structure, whereas China is different. But at the end of the day, as a result of what's happening in China and the relationships between China and Taiwan, you're seeing a diversification. The US has already said, look, we don't want to be dependent only on China. We have to diversify. So that's the reason why Korea, Japan, India, Malaysia, and these other countries are beginning to garner all of this new technology to manufacture and produce for the American public. And most important is also the fact that the US is funding billions of dollars to manufacture semiconductors in the US. So they're inviting TSMC, you know, Taiwan Manufacturing, to the US to produce semiconductors. So we're seeing a diversification of the supply chain, which is going to be beneficial to consumers around the world. And you're going to see an acceleration, because now China is saying, okay, if you're going to restrict us, we're going to produce our own technology. And it's easy to see that some of the Chinese products are really exceptional, are very well done.
Yeah, it's such an interesting space. I mean, we think about the supply-demand dynamics. We know that there's a squeeze on the supply front. We're thinking about raw materials, which mostly come from Africa, for example, and how that's going to play out. But you mentioned something interesting. I mean, I think I'm really taking into consideration that we've got an election year in the United States. We don't know how that's going to play out in terms of tariffs and how that could change trade scenarios globally, how that could change dynamics. Are you pricing some of these geopolitical issues into what could be happening around the world in terms of trends and investable options right now for you?
We have to.
Yeah. Do you see it as a risk or opportunity in terms of what will?
It's a risk. There's a risk for government regulation. There's a risk in currency. There is a risk in industry changes. For example, if you just take the industry, the call center industry, they're being threatened with AI. Yeah. A lot of the call centers will be closing as a result of AI taking over those positions. So you've got to be aware of all these risks at the end of the day. And ESG, every company we look at the environmental risk, we look at the social risk, we look at the governance risk. So all of these must be taken into consideration. And again, AI is so terrific because we can look at these risks in a much more comprehensive and rapid way.
Are you afraid of AI like many people are and saying there are so many risks that we haven't really explored and we don't know what that will mean for humanity?
I'm not afraid of AI.
You're not afraid?
I'm in love with AI.
You're in love with AI.
Because okay. I think it's going to help us going forward.
Fantastic.
In many, many areas.
So I'm also curious, now that I've got you here, I mean, what do you think of crypto? And
You know, I always tell
cryptocurrencies.
people I don't like to talk about religion in public because it is a faith.
Yeah.
But it's something that is quite remarkable when you think about it, because you have a new generation of people, young people, who have been perceptive enough to realize that they can't depend on governments for their wealth. They've got to look at other alternatives to the currencies.
Is this an erosion of trust in central banks and the currencies?
Well, that's it.
That's it?
A lot of these young people say, look, why should I depend on the US dollar? Yeah. And when the US government is printing at such a high rate and the dollar is being devalued as a result of this printing. So let's go to something which is more stable, and that goes into crypto. So it's going to be something that's with us for quite a long time. In fact, we're now writing a book on central bank cryptocurrencies, because central banks around the world, we've seen almost every country in the world looking at central banks, looking at crypto as a means to participate in this revolution.
What's your gold holding right now? Do you hold gold?
Gold, I believe in as a long-term
Still?
safety valve. It's very, very important to be holding physical gold, not paper gold, physical gold.
In your house, in a vault?
Yes. But at the end of the day, the best investment, most of your investment has got to be in equities, in stocks of companies. And the simple reason is that companies adjust their prices to inflation. So you're able to beat inflation with investments in equities.
Because over the long term, markets always go up, right? Okay, so a few minutes left. What would you say the biggest risk is right now facing the global economy? What keeps Mark Mobius up at night?
You know, you can talk about the Ukraine problem, you can talk about what's happening in Taiwan Straits, and many other such factors. But at the end of the day, these are factors which you will not be able to predict. So the best way to look at this global situation is through the eyes of the individual companies in which you're investing. How is it going to affect these companies? And perhaps the biggest risk facing these companies has to do with currency, because we know that the US dollar is devaluing, and we know that currencies around the world peg their currencies to the US dollar. So this is a big factor that you have to take into consideration. So if you ask me for one risk, that's probably the risk we'd have to look at.
I mean, it brings up so many other questions, and I read so much about this. What is the future of the US dollar? Can it survive? Is it the start of the end of the US dollar? Are we far away from that, do you think?
We're pretty far away from that.
Not in my
because
lifetime,
it's a currency that's being used around the world. It's a currency that is easily available, easily exchangeable. By the way, one of the risks, of course, is the restrictions that the US government is putting on the transfers from Russia and other parts of the world which they politically are not in favor of. That's a risk for the predominance of the US dollar, so that could change. And that's one of the reasons why crypto is rising, because a lot of people want to transfer money and they can't do it in US dollars for political reasons, and therefore they do it with crypto.
With crypto, yeah. Okay, so a few seconds left. Which countries are no-go areas for you right now?
No-go? None.
None.
No, we look at all, we're in favor.
You look at companies within...
Some countries like North Korea, Russia we cannot go into now, and some of these countries.
But you were one of the first to invest in Russia in the 90s, right? Yes.
We were
so you've also got to look at those
Russia.
opportunities, post-conflict, those opportunities that arise.
I mean, I love Russia, and I'd love to invest more in Russia. I still have investments, personal investments in Russia. And in fact, recently I met with some Russian brokers here in Dubai. By the way, one of the nice things about Dubai is you can meet with these people in an open environment. So I love to invest more in Russia, but it's just closed for now. but it's not going to be forever. We'll be able to do something.
Things change. That's one thing we know. Okay, so last thoughts as people here in the audience came to listen to words of wisdom. As they walk away, what is the one thing they should do in their portfolio today and look at?
Buy equities and look closely at the Middle East markets, because here in Dubai, the market is growing at a rapid pace. You've got some incredible companies in Abu Dhabi and Dubai that are listed here. And of course, you've got Saudi Arabia, which is an enormous market. So I think it's important for them to look at these markets.
Fantastic. Mr. Mark Mobius, great to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.